Okay, I think we are live. It shows that we are live, so hopefully we are. Hello, everybody in Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So welcome to Ruby Tuesday 79. It's already March already. Time flies. Okay, so as usual, Ruby KL and Ruby Penang brought to you by Ruby KL Brigade and engineers.my for the StreamYard. As always, if you're not already on our Facebook, to join us. People do post job listings there as well. So if anybody is interested looking for a job or want to share any information about Ruby or even Rails, feel free to do so at the Facebook group. Meetup.com is where all the events details are. So feel free to follow us there as well. GitHub, for sometimes we do code related activities. So we mostly use the KLXRB GitHub. We're on Slack as well. If you need anything or you would like to speak as well, just hit us up on Slack. We use Discord whenever we do code clinic, right? It involves like a lot more people and can easily segment out to groups. So yes, do join us there whenever we do a code clinic. Okay, I'm Gui, and Gui is here with me today. Tristan will be joining us shortly. Yes. First reminder, feel free to comment or chat on whatever platform you're watching on, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or even Twitch. We'll definitely see it. And even if we don't respond immediately, we'll definitely look at whatever questions you have at the end of the talk or even end of the session today. Okay, second reminder, as always, we follow the Ruby community conduct. So please be mindful of this, and we won't tolerate any behavior outside of this. Okay, hiring shoutouts. I think I saw a few posted on Facebook. I think smile.io is hiring. Gui, do you know any postings or listings you want to talk about? Hey, Tristan.
Hey, hello. Yeah, speaking of hiring, Rapid River is hiring Ruby developers, but it would be good if you also know some React or Vue or any kind of JavaScript framework, because we do a lot of web applications with Rails and Ruby and sometimes PHP and JavaScript. So we're looking for a few developers.
Yes, Faith is still hiring as well. We have full-time positions, and also we're looking for freelancers or people do on a consulting basis. We have a few projects we want to wrap up in a few months. So yeah, anybody interested can reach out to me. Okay, let's see. All right, first talk for the day. We have What's Love Got to Do With It? Ruby and Sentiment Analysis by Ben. Let me move Ben in. Hey, Ben.
Hello, how's everyone doing? Hi.
Great.
Awesome. It's really good to be here. I wish I was with you in person. You know, but this is as close as we're gonna get in I guess this year and last year as well. But yeah, it's really nice to meet you.
We did meet each other in when things were still okay and people can travel. I think the last Ruby conference was it Thailand? I think.
Yes, RubyConf Thailand.
Mm-hmm.
That was excellent. Hello, Clarice. Clarice chimed in on the comments. Yes, RubyConf Thailand was fantastic. That was such a good conference. That was 2019, right?
It was 2 years ago.
Yeah,
2020 is basically like deleted.
It's like, what year was that again? It's almost impossible to remember the years anymore. That was the first RubyConf in Thailand.
I think so. Yeah, that was the first conference after Red Dot Ruby took a pause, and then Thailand took over, and then 2020 happened. So
then 2020 happened, and that's all we need to say about 2020. And then 2020 happened, and that's it. I know it was a year. I'm happy to get started. If that's should we move forward?
Yeah, okay. Please go ahead.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to talk about sentiment analysis and building an app in Ruby to process it. And I want to start by sharing that what we're going to talk about today is going to cover a lot of different domains, a lot of different areas. And no matter what you're interested in, I hope that there's something out of this talk that you can come away with. So whether it's working with APIs, and if you never worked with APIs before, then that might be an introduction for you. Or if it's sentiment analysis and natural language processing, or if it's the general area of linguistics. We're going to cover a lot of different domains in a bit of time together. So I'm quite excited about it. Before we do that, just briefly, who am I? Once again, my name is Ben, and I personally love Ruby. I actually work as the Ruby developer advocate at Vonage. We're a cloud communications API company. And I am a second career developer, and I spent a decade working in clergy as a sort of a Jewish minister, a rabbi, and a community organizer. And I've lived in many different parts of the United States, from San Diego, California, to New York City, to Boston, Massachusetts, and then Denver, Colorado. And I now live in Israel, outside of Tel Aviv. And as I mentioned, I'm a developer advocate at Vonage, and I work particularly in the Ruby ecosystem. What we're going to do in our time together is we're going to discuss why this entire subject of sentiment analysis and natural language processing, why it matters at all. We're going to spend a few minutes together on what sentiment analysis is. We're going to sketch out what we're going to build together. We're going to build it, and then we're going to run it and analyze the results. So that's what we're going to spend our time doing. But before we actually build anything, we need to actually take a bit of a detour in understanding why this whole subject matters at all. And this detour is going to take us a bit of a journey on linguistics. It's going to take us a bit of a journey in the evolution of language and the ways in which language differs. And we start with what is perhaps one of the most fundamental concepts in the study of language. That language in itself is not a passive vehicle for information. Language, whether it's English or Spanish or Arabic or French or any language, is not only about conveying information A from person X to person Y. Language itself tells us a lot about the ways in which we think and the ways in which we construct the information that is important to us. And I want to give you one example in particular, and I'll give you a couple others as well, but this one really strikes out. And this is a difference between two languages that I happen to know. I don't know many languages. I only know really two, so I can share in the languages I know. The one in the top you might recognize, that's English, and the one below it is in Hebrew. And they both say the exact same thing, but how they say it tells us a lot about language. So the English sentence says, last night I had dinner with someone. It was delicious. And you can imagine this as a conversation over a water cooler back when people met in offices prior to 2020. And you're talking about your dinner last night. And in this conversation, you don't have to reveal much about the person you had dinner with. And the dinner itself is a gender-neutral article. It was delicious, right? Whereas in many other languages in the world, Hebrew is amongst them, but Hebrew is not alone. Hebrew is only a minority of language. One of the languages that do this. The majority of languages actually do this in the world. In that same sentence in Hebrew, etmol be'erev achalti arochat erev im mishahu hi te'ima, right? Last night I had dinner with mishahu, which is the Hebrew for someone, but that's a gendered word. So when you're telling the person, your colleagues, you had dinner with someone, you have to tell them the gender of the person you had dinner with, a male someone or a female someone. And just like there is no gender neutral someone, there's also no gender neutral nouns. So dinner itself is in the feminine. So the dinner is not, it was not delicious. She was delicious. Hi te'ima, she was delicious, because dinner is not an it, dinner is a she. So even in just the most basic example, you have to reveal more in one language than you had to in the other language. Another great example comes from this New York Times article in 2010. There are a set of languages in the world that are actually not egocentric in their directionality. They're actually geocentric. So what do I mean by that? If I would do the classic sort of pointing towards myself, right? In most languages in the world, overwhelmingly the vast majority of languages, this pointing towards me is me saying, look at me, look at my direction. I want you to focus on me. Whereas in geocentric languages. If I'm pointing this way, I'm not actually pointing at me, I'm pointing through me, and I'm pointing at the cardinal direction in this direction. So whether that's south or north or east or west, what have you, I'm pointing in that direction, not at myself. And a person who speaks one of these languages actually at all times, and there's been studies on this, it's absolutely fascinating, is aware of the direction that they're facing, whether it's north or south or east or west. And when they're giving you directions, they can say something like, oh, you want to go to that convenience store down the street? Yeah, you just turn east and then go down the street north 3 blocks, and then you're going to turn west, and then it's on the southeast corner. Whereas I might say to you, make a left and then a right, and then you go straight a couple blocks and you make another right. So that's another tremendous difference in the ways languages construct themselves. This is all to say that when a language dies, when a language is no longer used, when it goes extinct, an actual way of understanding the world goes extinct with it, which is language itself is not passive. Language shapes the ways, the constructs, sort of the mechanisms by which we understand the world, because language itself is that constructor. And when we understand language, like itself, the actual thing of language itself, understanding it can help us understand society writ large. And algorithms can actually assist us in getting to a deeper understanding. So, having said that, what is this study of natural language understanding, natural language processing, and sentiment analysis? What is it in it itself? What is it is perhaps from a balcony perspective, what is it is a fulfillment, is an attempt to fulfill this vision, perhaps prophetically laid out by Alan Turing in 1950, where he said that he believed that by the end of the century, meaning by the year 2000, that it would be impossible to see thinking and machines as contradictory, that a machine and thinking would be synonymous. And what it is to think is perhaps to understand the nuances, the complexities, the contradictions of human language. If you can help a machine, a computer, understand all the ways in which human language is so utterly baffling and can break it down and understand it, perhaps, and this is perhaps, but perhaps you can say that that machine can understand a bit of human thought and thinking. So let's take an example of how analysis looks like from a natural language processor. Taking that sentence we began with, last night I had dinner with someone, it was delicious. That sentence, when it's passed through an NLP algorithm, gets broken down to its different components. You can receive its sentiment, and you'll see the sentiment will give you a score. So in this case, that sentence is 97% positive, right? It's the score range from negative to positive. So this is a positive 97%. It's positive. You see the semantic roles in the sentence. Things like the subject is I, the object is dinner, the action is have, and it's in the past tense. And you get also keywords like last night is a 99% relevance. Dinner is 67% relevance. So the key words here is last night and then the thing I did following after that. And you get emotionality in addition to sentiments. Things like sadness come in, but joy is at 85%. Fear is at 0.04%. Disgust is at 0.03, and anger is at 0.02. So this is mostly a joyful sentence. And you can even get from these algorithms things like the categories of the sentence. So it's mostly around food and drink. It has also relevant text with dinner, scoring very highly, but mostly it's food and drink. That looks like a pretty accurate assessment, but that's also a pretty simple sentence. How this all gets achieved is through understanding the rules of natural language processing. And these rules really matter because if you take a sentence like police helps the dog bite victim, if I say police helps dog bite victim, that's the police being helpful. If I say police helps dog bite victim, that's very different. Now the police officer is not being helpful. The police officer is actually assisting, well, it's being helpful to the dog, not to the victim. And you get those differences from things like formal grammar, the inflectional endings, right? So police helps dog bite victim, police helps dog bite victim. those are different in the ways you end a sentence. Tagging the different parts of speech, what's the verb, what's the object, what's the what possession is it in, parsing the sentence, the root forms of words, the word meaning probabilities, topic segmentations, the relationships of one entity to another entity, who to whom, what to what, all different sorts of things come into bear in creation of these algorithms. One of the key things in understanding this, and this is actually where it gets quite difficult in human language, is understanding the polarity of what a person is saying. You and I, and all of us watching this together today, we are experts at understanding human polarity. Polarity is the extreme between two things, right? That's what polarity means, the poles, the extreme between two things. And humans, by our training as from infants and onwards, and our inculcation in our societies and in our cultivation of our languages, we're experts at understanding polarity. But it's really hard to train a machine to understand these things. And I'll give you a few examples, going from easiest to hardest. I dislike broken cars. What's the polarity of I dislike broken cars? Well, that polarity is like upsetness, anger, it's frustration. It's a simple one. I dislike broken cars. Let's go one step harder to I'd really truly love going out in this weather. Well, what's the polarity of I'd really truly love going out in this weather? It could be something like, oh, it's great outside, it's sunny, it's beautiful, it's a gorgeous day, it's 20 degrees outside, I'm ready to put on my beach wear and just enjoy it. Or it could be sarcastic. I'd really truly love going out in this weather. It's pouring outside. It's raining. It's put on my 3 layers. It's so cold. You want me to go out and get the milk in this kind of weather? It really differs depending on how it's articulated, right? That one is not even the hardest. I'll give you another one that's even harder. I love my cell phone, but would not recommend it to any of my colleagues. What's the polarity there? I love my cell phone, but I wouldn't recommend it to any of my colleagues. Do you either like it or you don't like it? Which one is it? Well, that could either be I'm so enthralled with my cell phone, I love my iPhone, I love my Google Pixel phone, whatever it might be, or it's I'm so confused, I like it, but I wouldn't recommend it. The problem is this sentence seems nonsensical and a little odd, but humans say things that are nonsensical and a little odd all the time. Language is full of these contradictions. And this sentence, to this day, is not easily parsed by natural language processing. That's the problem, right? The other ones you could get, even with the one that you needed sarcasm for, the one before this, you could kind of get it. You can train it to get a high level of accuracy. But this one is really hard. And it's still hard for all the algorithms out there today employed in popular natural language processing services. So now that we have a bit of an overview, kind of a whirlwind tour of natural language processing and linguistics and the ways language shapes things, we have to think for a second of what can we build with it? What can we make with it? What can we do for fun? So what we're going to do is understand that sometimes you just need to get to the point. If you're like me and the first thing you do when you wake up, after you wake up and you get dressed and the basic morning rituals, is I usually sit down with my first cup of coffee, first one of multiple ones. This is number, I don't know what count this is anymore. I drink my cup of coffee and I read daily news. For good and for bad, probably bad for my emotional health, but I read the daily news. And sometimes, though, the news can be overwhelming and you just want to get to the point and you want to know what the mood of the news is. So understanding the general emotion and sentiment of the news is actually a great use of sentiment analysis. I could just build an app that tells me whether the news today on this topic I like is either positive or negative, and I can move on. I can drink my coffee in peace and I don't have to be stressed out about it. So that's what we're going to build. We're going to build a WhatsApp bot that's going to take in a topic from a user that's sent in via WhatsApp. That topic will be scoured for all the news headlines in that topic. We're going to send those news headlines in step 2 to IBM Watson's natural language processor. And then we're going to send them back through the Vonage Messages API, which allows you to build multi-channel communication bots. And we're going to use it for WhatsApp. You could have done it with Facebook or Viber or SMS or what have you. And we're going to send it back the sentiment overall on that news topic for the day. And we're going to build this with Rails because we love Rails and Rails is just so much fun. So why not? So we're going to build it together. as I mentioned, we're going to use the IBM Watson Natural Language Analyzer. We're going to use the News API to scour the web for the news topics. And we're going to use the Vonage Messages API. What I like about all three of them, besides one of them employs me, but what I like about all three of them is that they all have a great free access tier. When you just sign up, you can get some access. They all have a Ruby SDK that's pretty well documented and tested. And I'm a bit partial to the Vonage Ruby SDK because I maintain it. And they also have good documentation. First thing we need to do, obviously, is build the gem file. This is built using Ruby 2.7.2. You can do this in Ruby 3 as well. We're using Rails 6.1.1. You could use Rails 6.1.3, which I believe just came out recently. And then the 4 important gems for us in this purpose is the Vonage Rails gem, which is so the Vonage gem is the Ruby SDK for Vonage. The Vonage Rails gem is our initializer of the Vonage gem in a Rails application, which what it does, in short, is it's trying to make your life as a Rails dev a little bit easier. What it does is initializes your credentials for you, your API credentials, across your Rails application globally, so you don't need to initialize it yourself. You just install the gem, supply the credentials in either .env file or in a Rails credentials, and it'll read that automatically for you and build a client. We're going to use the News API gem, the IBM Watson gem, and .env Rails to manage our .env credentials. After that, with any kind of Ruby Rails application, we need a couple routes. Here, we have no views in our application. This is just purely a WhatsApp bot, right? It's going to take in inbound topic, and it's going to take in the status. That's all it's going to do. 2 post routes, not much more there. It's pretty simple. We could, if we wanted to, build views and have like a nice presentation layer where we show it dynamically in the web as well. But really, going to interact primarily just on through the vehicle of WhatsApp. And then, of course, we need our environment variables. So we need our API key from News API, our API key and URL from Watson, IBM Watson, and we need our API key and secret and our WhatsApp number from Vonage. You need to provision a WhatsApp number. That's part of the regulations of WhatsApp and how to send messages through them programmatically. And you need to create a Vonage application on your Vonage API dashboard, and you need the ID. Once we have that, we're going to build all of our logic in our controller. Now, I can hear all of you saying to me now, what, you're building all this in your controller? That's wild. This is a big controller. I recognize that. We're doing this just to get the job done. If we were doing this in production, we would probably build some service helpers. We would probably put some stuff in model logic. But we just want to create this and get a working model, a working sort of proof of concept. So we're going to make a pretty big controller. Take a deep breath as we do it. It's going to have a lot in the controller. We will survive it. So we're going to require our dependencies up above, and we're going to create 2 methods for our 2 routes, inbound and status. Our status route is really primarily just going to return a no content, a 204 back to the API when it receives data from the webhook, just to acknowledge to the Vonage API that, hey, we received your updates. We appreciate it. You don't need to keep on sending them. Once we do that, we are ready then to build the inbound route, the inbound method. So this is the WhatsApp message coming into us from the WhatsApp user. So let's say they send a message about Ruby Malaysia. So we're going to take the topic, which comes in through, this all comes through parameters, right? From the parameters, a message, content, text. And then we also, of course, need the number of the person so we can reply to them. That comes from the from and the number. And we're going to pass that data to a method that we have not yet created. This method we're going to call analyze headlines. And it's going to accept 2 arguments of a topic, which is going to be what they sent in, and the phone number of the user. That's the way I like to code. I like to first think about what the methods I will need, and then I actually kind of invoke them, and then I create them after. If I'm being really good, I first build a test and then create the method name and invoke it and then build the content one step at a time. But in this case, we're going to at least put the method name there, invoke it. It's not going to work because it doesn't exist yet, but we're going to build it. Once we have our inbound route, the next thing we need is to analyze headlines. This is a bit bigger. Analyze headlines. Essentially, what we need to do here is instantiate an instance of the IBM Watson Ruby SDK. So that's happening on line 2, where we assign it to a variable called authenticator. We pass in our API key to do that. And then we, once we have sort of our authenticator, IBM Watson sort of credential object, we pass that in to create an instance of the IBM Watson NLU Ruby SDK instance. That's on from line 6 to line 9. I don't know why that version is so important, but that year is pivotal to this API's development. I'm sure someone can do the research and figure that out why, but you need to pass in that version, year, month, and date as well. And then we need to also, because we are on the free account of IBM Watson, wherever we created our IBM Watson account geographically, that will be our API gateway to IBM. So I happen to have created this account when I was at a meetup at a conference, I believe in Amsterdam or in Rotterdam, somewhere in the Netherlands. And the closest gateway for me at IBM Watson when I created this was London. So forevermore, my API gateway for IBM Watson, unless I make a paid account, is the London gateway for IBM Watson. And then on lines 12 through 24, what we're basically doing is we're saying we want to get all the different types of processing of this language that we can get. And we talked about what those were in the very beginning. The entities, the keywords, the sentiment, the concepts, the relations, the semantic roles. We want the emotionality. We want all of it. Give me everything, right? We could ask for less, but I'm of the opinion, why ask for less when we can ask for it all? And what do we want? Well, again, on line 13, we're going to create a method. We're invoking a method that we haven't yet created. We'll create it momentarily, called get news headlines. So the text is going to be dynamically generated from this method called get news headlines with the argument of the topic that the user has sent in via their initial WhatsApp message. We were going to output that on line 27 to our Rails console just so we can watch it happen in real time. And then on line 30, we finally send the WhatsApp message back to the user with their sentiment of the news that they're interested in for that day. Get news headlines is a bit smaller of a method. It takes a little less. The credentialing, really on the IBM Watson Ruby SDK, what takes a lot there is asking for all those different features. We could put that on one line, but if we break it out, it's a lot of lines. And also you need to create that authenticator object with IBM Watson and then pass in that object to the NLP SDK object. So it's like a couple steps. With the get news headlines, the news API that we're using, the credentialing is a lot easier. The credentialing is on line 2, where we're just passing in our API key to a new instance of the news API SDK. And then on line 3, we say we want everything. We want all the news on that topic from today. And on line 5, I did something I think is a little interesting. What I did was I said, I want to sort that news by popularity. And I didn't have to do that. And the reason why I did that was because in my mind, it became really essential to think about the news. If I'm interested in what the sentiment of the news is in that day, it goes sort of like in descending order on the amount of eyeballs that hit the news on that given day. So the more eyeballs looking at that news on a given day, the more I want, I'm going to make this a little larger just to make sure people can see it. I just realized I apologize in advance for the earlier slides where it was a little, maybe the font was a little small. That might, hopefully it's a little better. But what I want is the amount of eyeballs in descending order on the topics, because that's what generates, what sort of creates the sentiment around a news topic in a day. And then I get that back in a bunch of headlines, array of headlines. I want that as a string of headlines, just one long running string, because that's what I need to pass to IBM Watson. And that's what I return on line 14 is that string of headlines. Once I have all that, I'm then ready to send the message. And this is long. You don't need to really actually know this so much. It's not as important, but because it's basically creating an API request, a post request to the Vonage Messages API. The Ruby SDK, most of our SDKs on Vonage, we don't build support for APIs that are not yet in general availability status, GA status, or any API under GA, meaning a beta API. It may be production ready. It is production ready, but because beta implies the ability to change it more rapidly, we don't incorporate it into our main releases of our SDKs. So we don't have methods in the Ruby SDK for the messages API yet. So we just have to build this out manually. The API post request to the messages API. When that API, the message API, reaches a GA status, general availability status, then we will incorporate all of these API calls and abstract them out into methods in the SDK itself. But as you see, we build out the post request, and on line 21 until line 36 is the request body that will be sent to the Vonage messages API. It needs a from object and a to object. Both of those you have to specify a type. In this case, the type is a WhatsApp message. It could have been Viber, could have been SMS, could have been Facebook. And then the message itself, we specify in a here doc from line 28 until line 35, which is the message's interpolated message of the text. You ask for the mood of the news in the following topic with the variable of the topic, and then we pass in each element of the sentiment, of the emotionality scores and the sentiment for sadness, joy, fear, disgust, and anger. And the last step we need to do in this process is essentially to generate a token to authenticate with the Vonage Messages API. This is in the Vonage Ruby SDK. You don't need to abstract this out. And that's actually great, because if anyone's ever worked with JWTs, JSON Web Tokens for authentication, they are a very finicky thing. And they're not the simplest thing to build correctly on your own. And it's better if the SDK manages that for you. That's exactly what happens. You generate a claims hash, which is your application ID from Vonage, and your private key you download from your dashboard. And with that, you can generate a JWT, a JSON Web Token, and we return that token on line 7, and we pass that in to our API request, our post request to the messages API. Trust me, you should be very grateful. I'm very grateful that we have the JSON Web Token functionality in the SDK, because it's not the easiest thing to either build or to make sure you're getting it right and correct. JWTs are finicky. Once we're all done with that, we're actually ready to give it a go. So I've of course done this in advance. So ready to give it a go. Let's actually take a look at what we get. So if we give it a go and we run it, so I'm going to send this, and we're going to send in the topic. This was only a few days ago. The topic we're going to send in is programming. So this is now sent to the news API, get all the headlines. This is behind the scenes. The headlines then get sent to the IBM Watson SDK, and then we return this WhatsApp message from the Vonage Message API. And we see that on this day, I created this about a few days ago. You see that on the topic of programming, it was overall positive, the sentiment, with an emotional score of 47% sadness, 0.47% sadness, 79% of joy, 0.6% of fear, 1% of disgust, and 16% of anger. That's interesting, right? So joy is the dominant emotional score here, 79%, but anger doesn't come in far behind. So there's quite a lot we can say, actually, about the interplay between anger and joy and how they're kind of related to each other. And this could be a whole nother topic on itself of human psychology. But how do we get this score? I wouldn't want to leave us here. Let's actually now take a moment to examine the data that came back to us that generated those scores, because we need to understand how this actually worked to get a fuller appreciation of the topic that we're discussing writ large. What were the headlines that came to us? A whole array of headlines. Things like, this 11-course bundle will teach you how to build a killer Android app. Hello world, but how do I start? Making games on your own as an engineer. We see that there's a teaser for some true crime docuseries premiering on Epix this May. 3D printing and embroidery combined to create sustainable garments. We see something about Boulder's daily camera shares, the detailed look at finances. Something from Fox Business Plus One Solutions API ensures a whole view of the network's compliance and risk information. We see some stuff about some net income of euro 234 million euros in 2020 and a dividend of 1.80 euro per share. And then lastly, I think I might be a design engineer. What an array of topics. If we break down those topics, we had 20 headlines in our sample data. 7 of those were actually directly related to programming. So that means that 38.8% of our sample was directly related to the topic at hand. So first thing right off the bat, always examine your data. So when we examine the data, we might see that it is not necessarily what we think it might be. We think we were querying for programming topics, and we were. But in programming is also things like TV programming, latest TV shows coming up, financial forecast programming. I might not have used the word programming before in that, but it was there, and a whole other array of topics. So when we look at what those topics generated, we see that we had a score of 80%, which label was positive, right? The sentiment is from a -1 to a +1. So this is a pretty high positive score, 80%. The emotional results were, as we noticed, 79% for joy, 16% for anger. But what is that really about? So those sound good, they sound interesting, but if we actually look at what the concepts that were identified that generated that score, we have to go back and look and understand those. Because if we don't understand those, we can't really understand the data. So what were the top concepts identified in our programming query? Income, 92%. Game, 89%. Design at 88%, revenue at 79%, and construction at 75%. In these top 5 concepts, I personally don't see one that directly ties in to what I was thinking when I made my query for programming news headlines. It's not directly related to what I imagined. It's related, but it's not what I was thinking, because computers do what they do. They don't necessarily do what we are implying for them to do, right? Even the most sophisticated algorithms. So if we return back to that prophetic quote from Alan Turing in 1950, that by the year 2000, the idea of machines and thinking, those two concepts in juxtaposition with each other, would not be contradictory anymore, we have to ask ourselves, through the lens of natural language processing, if we have truly arrived at that moment. And when we look at what we just did, that journey of looking at programming and how we got something that's far different from what we thought we would get. And the data looked like one way, but the analysis that was underpinning that data was actually farther off than we might have imagined. The answer to Alan Turing, if by the year 2021 that we have reached that point, I think the answer might be not quite yet. Thank you very much. I want to share with you a few resources that I felt were very helpful for me in this. A lot of my linguistics analysis of this comes from a book by Guy Deutscher called Through the Language Glass, Why the World Looks Different in Other Languages. And there's a fantastic article from the University of Chicago Press in 2011 that talks about positive polarity items. And then you can find the API reference for the various APIs. And lastly, you can find this on GitHub, this repository, and you can run this code yourself. I just updated it recently for the latest IBM Watson SDK changes. It's up to date with dependency updates. It's ready to be run, to clone and run yourself. And there's instructions on how to do that. And you can play around with it yourself and get analysis. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to present to you all today.
Wait, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
I thought I pressed unmute. But yeah, I was saying thanks, Ben, for the talk. It was like very insightful.
Thank you. I'm glad.
Will we be able to get like copies of the slides or the code? I think you had it as a final slide, but maybe like links to these things.
Yes, definitely. I can send to you or one of you, either directly or through Clarice, and she can disseminate the links to the code repo and also the slides. I'd be happy to share that. I know some of the slides, the font was a little smaller than I intended, and so that might be better to get the slides in a PDF format so you can blow it up to whatever resolution one needs.
because I was
There'll
trying to
be-
follow along a bit, and like I just realized on YouTube, line 13 is a bit. It's okay. So some other people might want to follow along as well because it's a very interesting topic.
I think it's a fascinating topic, and I have to admit, I might run topics through my little app more often than I want to admit, because just to see like what the sentiment is on random topics. Like, can you imagine like take your favorite or least favorite political leader and see the sentiment on them? You know, like the use cases are numerous.
Is there a way to improve the accuracy of these things? You mentioned about making sure that the data that you actually are inputting is what you wanted. But aside from like data cleaning, is there something we can do to make things more accurate?
There's ways to help. One of the ways you can help is you can actually specify I think the keyword, the object name in Watson is concepts, and you can specify an array of strings of sort of the key concepts that you're looking for in the query that you're sending along to them. So, if I was, let's say, want to be more specific and I'm looking for programming, I might want to narrow it down to computers, or narrow it down to algorithm or something. You have to think of some of those key conceptual words that might filter out like TV lineup programming, right, as an example. But even when you do that, in my experience, it's not 100%. Even then it gets better, but it doesn't get perfect, which is why I love, and this is a bit annoying for others, I love outputting to my console everything. I want to see all the data all the time, because I just never trust what I'm doing, either what I'm doing or what the computer is doing, because it's like I'm not smart enough to be doing everything right all the time, and the computer is certainly not smart enough to get it if I'm not smart enough. So it's like you want to see all the data as much as you possibly can, so that you have a sense of, and you eliminate the assumptions, basically.
Mhm. I have another question. Like, how do you know if the result you got is actually the result that is supposed to be there? Because this, with machine learning, you don't actually have the final answer to compare with, right? Like, unlike, for example, with normal algorithms, you have a sense of what the answer should be, and then you work the algorithm towards it. Whereas this is the other way around. You have an algorithm, you trust it, and then you feed data to it, and then you have an output. It's like, how do you know if the random number generator is actually giving random numbers? You have to trust that
That's you
it's
have
there.
just asked like the ultimate question on this entire thing, which is, there is a part of this whole field of natural language understanding which kind of like defies comprehension, because, and not because, but it defying that comprehension a little bit is actually a sign of its progress. Because I'm going to turn the question around to you. I'm going to ask you, how do you know that your understanding of the sentiment of somebody speaking to you is accurate? How do you know that? Can you break it down fully? You can't.
Just
You
know it.
really
Yeah.
can't. You just know it, right? Like when you listen to that sentence about "I love my cell phone, but I wouldn't recommend it to other people." That sentence seemed a little odd, but it didn't seem like totally odd. Like it kind of made sense to you, but how did it make sense? It didn't make any sense. It's totally nonsensical. How did that make sense? It only makes sense because there's a part of human language which is kind of like hard to encapsulate, and it's hard to sort of like wrap it around. And the second that algorithms start making sense of that, and you don't understand how they're making sense of it, you can actually start understanding that they're understanding it more. And it's really strange and a little terrifying at the same time. But
Yeah, that's a paradox. The more
it is
that
a paradox, because
we're-
human language is a paradox, because human language is an expression of humans, and humans are really like impossible. I don't know. I can't understand humans normally. So, the fact that like we want computers to understand humans, like that's a whole nother layer of understanding.
Louis?
Okay, so I worked with SentiWordNet before. So is there any alternative in terms of Ruby for like SentiWordNet? Because you have lexicon and also WordNet. So you can break it down into smaller words, and then each of this will have a score, and then they
Yes.
have similar words, so you can score it differently. Depends on the context. and you
Yes.
can weight differently whether it's in the front and then back. The emphasis score, like, is there anything around Ruby for that?
Not particularly that I know of in Ruby, at least. It could be, but not that I know off the top of my head. But I would say though that the larger question or larger topic you talked about, which is like might get more accurate scores. Clarice said humans are complicated. Yes, humans are complicated. You might get more accurate scores if you break it down to smaller components. That is true. But what you also lose at that point is the larger contextual scoring. And so you might get more accurate score on a word or a pair of words, but those pair of words are going to not reflect the larger, how do you say, like sentimentality that you're trying to achieve there in the sentence. And so it's only helpful to an extent. And this, by the way, gets so much work. Like we focus on English, and I just want to like say that as well, because English is the most studied of the languages when it comes to natural language processing. And depending on like, I don't even know how to phrase it, but like a language's popularity, I guess, is more or less studied. Some languages are super hard for this. And, I just saw recently, I think it was on the BBC, a report of like one of the world's last whistling languages in some South Pacific islands where it's like the whole language is conducted via whistling. How do you do that? Like, how do you process that? I don't even know. And then, of course, there's languages that put the article before the verb or the verb before the article, and different sort of like the possessions of things, and verbs and no indefinite articles, and there's so many different challenges to language. And then you see this with Google Translate all the time, and like the most common example. But like languages that gender words, like most human languages, they get unfair treatment in Google Translate. Like if you don't speak the language and you try and Google Translate from English to something else, it's almost always going to be in the male form, which is so weird. Like you don't know, but you could be referring to like a female employee or a female colleague, and you're talking to them in the male form because you're using Google Translate. And that just doesn't make any sense, and that's why, because English is the dominant language that this is all built upon. And honestly, English is the oddball. English is an odd language. English is the exception to almost all human languages. It doesn't make any sense, but it's become the language which is all built upon.
Yeah, I guess it's also good that we can use third-party API rather than train the whole thing ourselves, because that's very complex. Like IBM Watson is, you basically just offload all this complex problem in terms of getting a context to Watson.
Yes, and someone just raised a very good question at the end in the comments, which is, are we at the mercy of APIs to major companies in the future, as accuracy training needs a lot of training and data? That's it hurts my heart a little bit, because it's very expensive. This training and this whole data modeling costs a lot of time and money, and we need more public money in this. We need more government funding. We need more nonprofit funding. We need more money in this, so that we don't have to be at the mercy of companies. And they could be great companies, but this kind of human knowledge should be in the pursuit of everyone, in the open domain.
And I'm guessing if it's open, then that does not necessarily fix, but takes into account diversity, because the more input you have with more humans, the different kinds
yes.
of inputs, then it becomes better, because now everything is inclusive.
That's exactly right. Like if you would take the big three NLU analyzers that are privately held, like IBM, Microsoft, and Google, and you compare the results on the same sentence, not a basic sentence like the dog is nice, but take a sentence with some level of complexity and compare it across those three, you would get different results. And why you get different results, you would then ask yourself, because that's a good question, and you would go to their docs, and you would not get an answer. You would not get an answer because you'll come to a point in the docs where they say this is proprietary information, and we cannot disclose. This is our intellectual capital, and we can't, our IP, we can't disclose this. And that's totally understandable, but it's also why this should maybe not necessarily be only in the private domain.
Yep, true. I think the SentiWordNet is from Princeton.
Yes.
It's open source because it's under the university. They use the grant
Right.
money. It needs to be open source. For Malaysia, there's a library called Malaya, but it's in Python. Basically, it's just people doing open source and keep on improving, training the model. I think it's just up to like how to parse the library. They have a set of WordNet and like the lexicon, just that we need to parse into different languages, so it bridges how people can use it.
Right. And some of the less studied languages by the private sector actually have larger sort of open source initiatives in them because the private sector hasn't like subsumed it, right? And so like for example in Hebrew, a little bit I know about it, there's like a lot of government and and university work in NLP and Hebrew, and the reason why is because it's not a huge language in the NLP market, right? Like it's not, for the 14 million speakers in the world, it's not really the biggest financial incentive like taking Arabic or Chinese or English or Russian. And so it's like it's open more to government and nonprofit and educational work because the businesses are less interested in it. So that's an interesting sort of caveat as well.
Yeah, true. Anything from Guikiao?
Nothing really pertaining to this topic. It's interesting, and I don't have a lot of exposure to this. So yes, it definitely piqued my interest. So I'll definitely be looking more into this area.
It's really interesting, and like the Ruby bit is a bit of a bait because you could do this in any language, obviously, but really, like I just wanted to talk about this. Like, I think this is like a great topic, but I've given this talk a couple other times, and I hope that folks who maybe never made API calls, like you see that in making API calls in Ruby, isn't like there's different things you can do with like that you learn how to do in Ruby from this talk, but like the crux of this talk is really thinking about human language and how programming is just a really fascinating way to break down and understand human language. And you can do that work in Ruby. You can also do it in Python and you can do it in R. You could do it in anything, but you can do it in Ruby too. Ruby's not the exception. You can do this here too. And Jeffrey mentioned that there's a person, Andrew Kane, might have some gems for Ruby NLP. He's worked very hard bringing machine learning to Ruby. That's definitely something to check out. And I'm going to put that on my list as well to check out too. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay, I think that's about all the questions that we have. Thanks so much for your time today, Ben.
Thank you. It was so much fun. Next time in person.
Hopefully.
Actually, I kind of want to tease. I think we have a talk from you next month as well. I kind of want to tease it out.
Anything is possible. Anything. It's all up to Clarice. Clarice is my my best friend, and so whatever Clarice says is what I do.
And we have this published on YouTube and Facebook as well. Sometimes people discuss the topics there or have some questions. And I'm guessing if we do have like people, or like I'm actually like for people who are watching this after the live show, you can put your questions either YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch. We'll read them and then forward them to Clarice, who's going to like nicely format them, get Ben to answer it, and make sure that they get answered. And we'll post back on probably Meetup or one of the pages, probably in the description somewhere. So
That sounds awesome.
Ben is still available. I think I'm just presuming, but I think
thankfully I'm still alive. I hopefully will be alive tomorrow as well, and the day after. There's no promises in 2021 or 2020 for that matter. So we just take one day at a time. But as long as I'm here, I'm available.
Yeah. Great.
All right, thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Right, so that was Ben. Next up, we have Chat 2 demo by Jowari. I will open in.
Hey, hello.
So, hey guys.
Hey, Jowari, is
So,
everything
yeah.
good?
Yeah, let's try it out while it's working.
Yeah.
So I don't know how long
Is
it's gonna
that
hold.
is that a real background, or is that like a background like mine, which is like just a green screen?
No, it's a real background.
Wow.
It's a real background. What we have is a real background. It's my
Very
office.
nice.
No, it's okay, I guess. Right. So let me just introduce myself, Jawari. Okay, let me be clear. So I don't I'm not the lead developer for the software. I haven't coded in a while, so I do have a job, another job, and this is something that I've been designing the software, I guess, and I have like a partner coding it. So let's just be clear on that. So yeah. Yeah. So can I start going
Sure,
through the
yeah.
app?
Yep, go ahead.
I
Yeah.
guess
So
this is an app that you did on your free time, basically, or
yeah,
is this your
yeah.
actual job? Yeah. Hmm.
Um,
All right.
I have
And
I manage some other stuff and not
mhm.
this. Yeah. So I also manage the person who's building this.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
no, I'm not
And
currently. I'm not really a coder. So yeah.
I guess you're presenting this because you'd like some feedback from people who are watching, like basically a
Right.
critique of those of
Right.
a Ruby on Rails application. All right.
Yeah. I guess I just want to see like what people think of the application, whether it's useful or not. So I'm just gonna take the shortest amount of time as possible.
All right.
So yeah.
No worries, go ahead.
So the idea is I kind of want to help people run organization in a way that I understand how to run organization, and that's about it. Like, yeah, so I'm helping people out on building on running an organization. So we built like a simple chart tool, so you can. I mean, I'm just gonna skip the whole sign up, sign in. I'm just gonna show you the thing that I'm most interested to get feedback on. So yeah, so we have like an org chart here that for you to manage your organization. The idea is you start from here and you can assign different people to each of the positions that you have, and you can define for each of the positions that you have, your company or your organization, or whatever organization you have. You can define their roles or whatever tasks you want to have them do. And then you can also view very specific procedures. You can define whatever procedure you need them to do for each of those tasks. And yeah, so now we also have planned to have like some KPI and references for each of the organization member that you have, and that's about it. That's the org chart tool that we are talking about. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to take too much time. That's the idea behind the org chart. So it's a slightly different take on what an org chart is. So yeah, so I think that's the presentation is about. Just showing you how it
Are
works. If you have any question on how it works, yeah.
are there any ways to like see a different perspective, because this is an org chart, so it's mostly top down, and then I'm guessing it's tiered, or the way you arrange it would be like the highest position on top going to like your rank and file to the bottom. Like, is there a different way of viewing the same organization, like I don't know, by function, and then you have like many things? I don't know how your data is actually connected to each other.
We currently, this is the only view that we have for
Mhm.
now. So this is the only way you can view it. So the idea is, from like a management perspective, you would sort of keep track of what everyone is doing, so you know what everyone is doing, and you save all the sort of responsibilities and processes that you have defined in one
Mhm.
place.
Like,
So it's
because for
centralized.
example, if I wanted to see anyone who is related to the to handling finances, for example, they're not necessarily on the same department. There might be finance people in particular teams, and so which might be on a separate portion of the org chart, depending on how the org chart is, because people report to different things, right? So, is
Right.
there a way to like, I don't know, highlight those things, or like see them in a different view? Or I guess you've answered that question already.
I guess the way you can do that is you just we are building the access control. We don't have it yet. So the idea is not everyone can see everything. So only certain people from different team member can see what they have been assigned to see. And the feature to collapse the org chart is currently something that we are going to build later on. But the main idea is that if you like the owner or the manager of the organization, you can actually like drill down on information about what everyone is doing or how they are doing it from the standard operating procedure page, so you know like how they do it and what responsibilities they already have. So that's the main goal that we have with the application. But we are working on the access control because we're trying to we're still building that. We're still building the features that we want, other features as right now.
Jeffrey from YouTube is asking, how is this supposed to be used as part of the organization's daily process?
So it's an interesting question. From the perspective of most people in the organization, it's not particularly useful other than for onboarding. Like, let's say you just hire someone and you want to see like you assign them to a position, and you can see like what sort of responsibilities you have or what kind of task has been assigned to that position. So that's about the only thing that I could think of right now. And
Are there any plans on expanding that?
Okay, so you can see from the chart here, we have plans to create a to-dos. Let's say for the manager wants to assign like a one-off task to them, or even like the idea is the projects button here would, when you click it, it would let's say like Irfan here is the software engineer and he's working on multiple projects on different platforms, because some people want to run on Jira or Basecamp or whatever project management tool. So we want to have like the manager can click on that and they can see it would just hook up to the whatever project management software they have. But yeah, so it's really for the person who is managing like 10, 20 people, something like that, or maybe even 5 people. And also the KPI is something that we've shown this to a bunch of people, and I think that there's a lot of interest in KPI. So I guess if the question is a daily like function or activities, if you want to use it. So I imagine like they want to check their KPI as well as the so then these tools are mostly for managers, like who's running like a team, they don't want to see the whole project task. They just want to see like what everyone has on their plate. So that's sort of the idea.
It's like a PM software. You mentioned Jira, but it's a org chart view.
It's not. Yeah, it's not a project management software. It's an organization management.
Organization management.
Yeah, it's more focused on organization.
Again, asking if this was built on a graph database.
Definitely no, not yet.
What database were you using here?
We are still like experimenting whether we still like wondering if people think this is something useful for them. I don't know, like for some people who've been we're using SQL right now. Sorry, so we're using SQL, SQL, PostgreSQL. Definitely not on graph database. We're just still so far out from that. So I guess we might try it out. Authorization as a service. We like to think of it as like a strategic tool for like organization managers to view resources that they have in the organization, like because people are resources in the organization, and you just want to allocate people like very effectively, and that's what I guess the main goal here.
Well, not necessarily about the org chart, but what made your team decide to do it in Rails instead of like PHP or Java or anything else?
Okay, I guess the only thing about it is that I'm most familiar with Rails because I used to design app. I used to build apps with Rails like a really long time ago. So I know like the key structure of how Rails work. And then but this main application but Rails is only used for the I guess for the basic building blocks of a website for a web. And this is actually entirely built on Vue, the Vue JavaScript. So yeah, I haven't used Vue enough to actually really have a good keep of it, but my partner is working on it. So that's uh, so in terms of Rails, it's really just a familiarity with Rails. That's why we're building it on Rails.
Yeah, looks good. When are we gonna see like at least a beta or something to actually experience?
Okay, so you can actually sign up and you can try it out now on the yeah. So yeah, if you want to try it out, you can check out our website, org-engine.com. Where can I write that?
Mhm. Are you ready to get like more signups than expected?
Um, we have been in production for a while.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so we've been in production. We try to maintain the database. We try to make sure because I don't know because I've talked to a couple of I don't know VP of marketing. They said that they never seen something like this, and they want it, but we have a couple of missing features that they want, but they like the idea that they can sort of look at the chart and they can drill down on information about each position at the organization. I guess that just makes sense for some people, but we don't know. I'm still testing, and also I get some feedback if people think maybe it's useful or it's not useful. So I'm definitely like trying to get those feedback because yeah,
All right.
if right.
So for the people who are watching right now and probably after, if they want to give feedback, how do they reach you?
Oh yeah, so you can just like send me like a message on Facebook or there's an email on the application, but yeah, so we don't have like a Facebook page yet, so we don't really have anything yet. So this is still like early stage. I don't know. So yeah, so just contact us on the Facebook page, just my personal page, if they have any question. Yeah, thank you for that.
So I think on orgengine.com/contact, if you go to to the contact about us, it's sales at org-engine.com. I guess that's correct, right? Or should we go to feedback and feedback and suggestions goes to contact as well. So I guess that's fine.
Yeah, they all go to the same email, so I will read most of the email. They're just different placeholder, I guess.
All right. Looks good.
Right.
What's
So
it
definitely
not?
like Jeffrey Song was saying something
Mm-hmm.
about inefficiency in the organization. That's definitely something that I see in an organization. Sometimes tasks are duplicated, or maybe let's say like we have 50 people in an organization, and someone is good at some programming languages, but that data is lost. So the final version of it, probably when as you design a position or a job description, so the system would sort of analyze who has those skills and it would suggest them to the right position. I guess it just does it. I think like most of the feedback that I get from my friends who's running like a small business, they do this on top of their head because they know everything about the organization and the people. But as you scale up, you have like 50, I think even 30 people. Sometimes you kind of miss information like that. Yeah, so definitely like we want to have like a duplicate. Sometimes people have duplicates, and we want to see how that works. Yeah, so just to answer what Jeffrey Song was asking, right? It's all right. Thank you. So that's it. My presentation.
Thanks so much for showcasing your app, Jory. And I hope we get I hope the feedback that people have been posting is useful for you as well.
All right, thanks. Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, I wasn't planning on presenting you, but yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. Right. So thanks a lot for the feedback.
Yeah, it went pretty well.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your time, Jory.
Mhm.
Okay, so that was Orgchart 2 demo by Jory Mokhtar. So as he mentioned, you all can reach out to, I think, his personal Facebook as well. So he's Jory Mokhtar. Okay, so that's the end of Ruby Tuesday this month. Thanks everyone for joining us, for tuning in as well. Thanks, Christian. Thanks, Gui.
Thank you.
Next month is what day is next month? That's April.
Let's see.
Where's my calendar?
6.
I don't have a calendar.
6. Next round will be
The
6th of
6th
April.
Of April. Yeah.
Yep.
So again, if people want to present something or has anything they'd like to show or has like a topic, reach out on YouTube, Facebook, on the Slack group, Discord, like anywhere. There's a Ruby group on the meetup.com, and then just say you want to present something, and then we'll see if we can slot things in. Kevin's just like doing emojis all throughout. I'm not sure what this means. What is this? A peace sign,
I don't
I guess.
Probably
Other one
the-
is a clap sign. Okay. Well, Kevin should present something. It's been a long time since I heard him present something. All right. I guess that's it, right?
Yep. All right. Thanks
Yeah.
everyone for coming.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you all again next month.